impossible is just about to come alive. And while they bicker about who's best, with a painful glance he'll silently rise. Their Savior's servant must show them how, by the will of the water and the tenderness of the town.
I wanted to give the Eucharist a talk by itself. I mean, we give whole retreats on the Eucharist, but I wanted to do it. And so on Friday, we're going to do Jesus in Jerusalem. And tomorrow we're going to do the parables. But what I was going to do this afternoon seemed seemed less important. Okay, it was more the literary style of Mark, and I don't know, it just didn't seem appropriate for this retreat. So I'm going to do something on Eucharist, and I'm basing it on a poem by Father Dan Berrigan. The Eucharist, institution of the Eucharist, like everything else in Mark, is very simple and straightforward. And if you need two words to say something, Mark will say it in one. And if you could say it by the spaces between the words, he uses those too. So it's not as elaborate. It does not have the washing of the feet, but you can't think of the Eucharist without that aspect of it. So thank you, Elizabeth, for adjusting our beautiful centerpieces here to convey that. Certainly Mark has service as his overriding view of Jesus's breaking into our lives. So we're going to start with the Eucharist. And then the paper that you need is a song that we will use at the end. Okay, so that's what you need it for. Because I know it's very frustrating, at least for me. I'm deaf in one ear since I was 30 or something. I lost it on an airplane. So it's very frustrating when I can't hear the words to something. So that's why I like to give out the words. But that's for the end, all right? So we're going to take the, here it is. Thank you. I should have known she had it up immediately. So I call this the sowers of peace. I probably because I was thinking of tomorrow with the parables, and of course one of the most famous of all Mark's parables is the sowing, the sower sowing the seed. But this is clearly Jesus sowing the seed, and Eucharist is a fluid presence in our lives. It's never stagnant. It never stays the same, contrary to some bishops' desires, but it always is moving. And from the beginning of the church, this is so encouraging for me, it has always been a source of tension. As long as we belong to a community of people that we call church, we're going to have a variety of ways that they think we need to be celebrating the Eucharist. So it's part of what it is. So don't get too upset about it, But what it also is part of, which we don't get preached too often, is that the Eucharist is all about peace. It is peace. Jesus is peace. Peace is not something for us as Christians. Peace is not something apart from the person of Jesus Christ. It's not just an ideal or a goal that we can work toward. For us, it is Jesus Christ. In union with his will is the way to peace. And justice is union with God's will, because Jesus has told us how to act. And when we act that way, then peace is a consequence of that. And so Eucharist is that moment where we lay down, there was a time when you couldn't bring weapons into church, all right? I think that passed in some places of worship. But it was churches were sanctuaries, all right? And so for us, it's not just the building, it is the Eucharist itself, whether it is celebrated in a cathedral or in a shack or in the middle of a bombed out crater of Hiroshima. It is the one and only, and it is Jesus Christ present to us at his greatest act of nonviolent love, which is his surrender to the Father for us on Calvary. And Mohandas Gandhi, who was never a Catholic or a Christian, said that the greatest act of nonviolent love the world has ever seen is Jesus Christ giving his life for his enemies on the cross. Now, if a Hindu could recognize it, somehow our blinders are on too often. So let's just, take the afternoon just to, in gratitude, of course. It's always gratitude about Eucharist. And to realize that the chasm between practice and theory of Eucharist in the church is the effect of original sin. We aren't perfect. And so we have even used and abused Eucharist up until this day. I mean, it's becoming a political, football in Washington right now. And it is a desecration of Eucharist for it to be used that way. So there is a chasm between the practice and theory of Eucharist in the church, the way there is a chasm in all of us between what St. Paul says, what I want to do and what I do, what I ought to do and what I can't do. All that's the growth journey that we're with Jesus on it. And we know from the little we've seen so far in Mark's gospel that Jesus is perfectly at home with bumbling fools. So, here we are. All right. We are ready for Christ in the human limitation and the divine abundance. If we learn nothing from the Gospels, let us learn that Jesus Christ can live with human limitations. We would have fired Peter long ago. He would not have been worthy to be a leader. That's not how Jesus thinks. Jesus looks at the heart, and to Jesus, there was no one more worthy with a more ready heart. I mean, look at King David. Outrageous sins and extravagant love. So both are part of who we are in Christ. And I want to start with the Beatitudes. I said I was basing it on a poem by Daniel Berrigan, but you have to start with scripture first. And I want to play, and I don't have the words for this, but I really do think that these words are clear. A very short song on the Beatitudes by an Irish singer, and her name is Noreen O'Ryan. Now, she doesn't write it that way. She does it in Irish, but I'm not sure how to pronounce it in Irish. so for us to look and see the quality of the Beatitudes, and like Jesus, you know, I'm learning so much. I learn more as I teach than when I study. And learning is that the specifics of Jesus's stories and life experiences are critical to understanding it. And so I was looking at the Beatitudes and trying to put them into the concrete of what it might look like, what it does look like today, you know, so I adjusted it a bit. So blessed are the poor, but not in my neighborhood. We all know that one. Huh?
Mm.
It's the reality. Blessed are those in sorrow, but drowning in emotional pain in drugs and alcohol. Blessed are the meek, but not in my law firm. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, but are called fanatics. You know, it's a great way. People rarely do, I think, rarely dismiss idealists today by saying, oh, you're just, you know, you're unreal. What they say is you're naive. You don't know how the world really works. See? So that you're, you know, a fanatic. You're out of touch with reality. Well, if the reality that most people have to live in today's world is not absurd, then, you know, you wonder who is naive if this is the reality we're being offered. You know, I noticed, I don't want to distract you, Marilyn taking the picture. Marilyn, just give me your email and I'll send you all these, because they're mine, and I don't care if you use them, okay? And take as many as you want, okay? Blessed are the merciful, but we get even. Blessed are the pure of heart, who are mocked as naive. Blessed are the peacemakers, but we justify war.
Mm-hmm.
Time and time and time again, the wars are justified by the Catholic Church. And even when they are condemned, the Iraq War was condemned as an unjust war before it started, and nobody acted on it. Saying it is unjust is meaningless unless you go the next step further and say Catholics can't fight in this war. Well, that would have decimated 60% of the Marines. The majority of the Marines are Catholics. Right? So, blessed are those who are persecuted for justice' sake and stoned by silence the prophets among us. It's a very effective way of stoning a prophet today, is just to ignore them. Or as J. Edgar Hoover did, investigate them. Yeah. So here's the poem I was talking about. Right. And they were asked, and why do you walk? Because of the children, they said, and because of the heart, and because of the bread. Because the cause is the heart's beat, and the children born, and the risen bread. I just love this poem. You know, most of us here are educators, and we would give our lives for our children, you know. And I remember when I first went into peace, you know, somebody says, why are you going into that? I said, because of the children. I hadn't heard this poem yet. I said, I've been 10 years picking up the broken bodies of children in my home for abused children. I said, somebody needs to go out and tell people they got to stop hitting their kids and stop putting them in situations of violence where they get killed by guns. So why do you stand and why do you walk? Why do we live the way we live? Well, of course, it's because of Jesus Christ. But when I read this poem, I let Jesus read the poem. So Jesus, we're saying to Jesus, why do you stand? And and why do you walk? And he's saying back to us, because of the children, and because of the heart, and because of the bread. We are destroying our children with our violence. Destroying them. Why would you do that to two little munchkins like that? You know? Because the cause is the heart's beat. And I think the Beatitudes are the heart's beat of Jesus Christ. And the children born, this is the people of God, and the risen bread, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We know the end of the story. Jesus rose from the dead. We know that good will triumph. But we don't have to wait for the final day, the ultimate parousia. We can help it triumph now. So for the rest of my presentation, I asked those questions, why and how and who. Okay. Number one, the motivation for justice, all in the context of Eucharist, because it's revolving around the risen bread, okay? Why do we stand for justice? Why do we celebrate Eucharist? For me, they are the same question. You cannot have one without the other. I mean, why was I standing in front of the cathedral in Sarajevo when I was being bombed? Because what else could I do in that kind of a situation except go to Mass? I mean, what else could I have done? Absolutely, you know? And why do we celebrate Eucharist? Because we are a people with the message of justice. And Eucharist is the ultimate justice. Jesus Christ, his message and his reign is our motivation for justice. And that is important. I learned that a long, long time ago. It's not enough to be appalled by violence. It's not enough to be sickened by injustice. That would only make us bitter or cynical or overworked, okay, and underpaid, goes without saying. But Jesus Christ and his message and his reign keeps us from thinking it's all about us. You know, because we're on an uphill battle with justice. And if we think it's our uphill battle, we're no better than Sisyphus, just getting down and starting over and getting down and starting over. So it's all about Jesus Christ, his message, his reign. We're just the spokesperson in the nitty-gritty of daily life. We're like the woman who put the yeast in the flour. Psalm 8, this is still part of our motivation. The wonder of creation of people. I love Psalm 8. It's a good reminder that life is not as miserable as the news portrays it, okay? There are always good people. When I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them, yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. God believes in people. We cannot, therefore, give up on the most evil person we think exists. Who is that? We don't know. Our motivation is for the children. And many things in life are against our children, starting with abortion, war, poverty, weapon sales, labor practices, neglect, abuse. And every one of them has fanatics like us working on them, okay? And every one of them has people working for them that are only single focused on one issue. And that's dangerous. You know, I remember being at a protest against abortion, and the people in the protest were getting quite violent in their speech. And I said to one of the guys, you know, this is violent. I'm leaving you. I said, you can't do this. This isn't, you know, they were theoretically Catholics. And he said, well, I can't control them. I said, well, I can control my feet, so I'm out of here, you know, and you see that over, and it's not just abortion, it's any protest. it flips it. You know, you see people protesting war and they're violent in their actions. Original sin. Okay. And of course, we have our lovely Laudato Si. The environment is a great victim of the injustice, all right? Famine, climate change, endangered species, carbon emissions, and we could go on and on. And one of the most beautiful lines in Laudato Si is that the crisis of the planet Earth today is not about science primarily, it is a spiritual crisis. And this is what I'm trying to say. And for those of us who are Catholics, everything is a Eucharistic crisis. So our Eucharist isn't in trouble just because some bishops don't want to give communion to Joe Biden. Our Eucharist is in crisis because we are not seeing everything as flowing from the same holy moment. And just, you know, again, the budget of the United States military, 47% on military and 34% on health, education, food, housing, and social services. And then what's not included in that are all the veterans' benefits. So you know, how do you measure a people? By what they spend their money on. How do you measure what your values are? By what you spend your money on. I mean, I have children whose parents are middle-class parents or poorer, and they're paying tuition to send their kids to our Catholic schools, and they're working 2 and 3 jobs. Then you have others who are doctors and lawyers, and they're not. They said, oh, they can get, you know, there's a new science school opening up. You know, their faith had very little to do with why they were in a Catholic school. So it's a measure of our values as a nation. Right. The second part is, how do we stand? How do we live the Eucharist? Right. We stand, but how do we stand? And we accept our responsibilities. You know, when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, he said, you see what I, your Lord and Master, have done for you, so you must do for one another. This is what we're doing. We are doing this for one another. So we accept joyfully the responsibility, and always, as you people do so faithfully, always we stand with the poor. Always. Right. And then, of course, more horrible statistics just to let us stay in touch with the non-Eucharistic practices around us. 15% consume 78%. 800 million people are hungry, 31 million in the United States. 1 in 6 live on less than $1 a day. That's a lot of people. So how do we live Eucharist? Pope Paul VI, Saint Paul VI, all right. No one is justified in keeping for his exclusive use what he does not need when others lack necessities. You know, we had a chapter this year. So I'm not sure why they even asked me to fill out the papers anymore, but they were asking, you know, they send them to everybody in the whole congregation. It's a general chapter, so it's all the world. So, you know, your suggestions for the future. All right, so I thought to myself, you know, you might as well throw in something that'll cause a discussion anyway. So I said, ask every sister to give away half of what she has. That was it. And so, first of all, it has to go through a small group. So the small group were people that knew me, they all laughed. They said, well, you won't have to sign your name. They know where that's coming from. But I said to them, you know, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go through my pathetic wardrobe, and I'm going to give away half, which probably even the homeless don't want. But anyway, and some of the other, I live with a great group of nuns. One said, I'm going to do the same thing. I said, and I'm going to give away half my books. Now that's a real wrenching for me. So, but I said, what would happen to our congregation if everybody gave away half? Now, for most of us, what we have isn't worth much, but it's the point of doing it. And it's it does do something to us. And maybe even then we would get to a point where the congregation would say, well, let's give away half of what we own. Now, of course, in the United States, it's nothing, but it's something up in Canada, you know, where they've been getting paid all their lives. So anyway, I sent it in. So we got through my first group, but you know, when they send you back the summaries, it didn't make it. But, you know, it's people like St. Paul VI that have been, you know, we've been raised on him, all of us have, huh? He's really the one that put the Vatican Council in our laps. John had the beautiful inspiration, but Paul's the one that got it through all those bishops and cardinals. So we're not justified. Now, if anybody preached that at Mass on Sunday, I can be sure that that bishop, of whatever priest preached it, would get a ton of letters from people in his parish saying, you got a communist preaching in our Mass, you know? St. Ambrose. Now, St. Ambrose was St. Augustine's teacher, all right? You are not making a gift of your possessions to the poor man. You are handing over to him what is his. Another communist. Archbishop Romero said, when I give money to the poor, they call me a saint. When I say people shouldn't be poor, they call me a communist. Peter Morin, with Dorothy Day, founded the Catholic Worker House in New York. This is Mary House. They have two blocks apart. Mary House is for the women, and right next to Mary House, there's Hell's Angels, the motorcycle club. And when they used to go down there for the Friday night meetings, I said, well, if I don't get killed on the way to the Catholic Worker or on the way back, you know, just because you had to pass in front of them, they're all over the streets with all their stuff. All right, so the extra coat in your closet belongs to the poor person who has none. And you know, if we do this as a burden, it doesn't mean anything. But you know, if you get to know a poor person, and we've done this all our lives, you get to know somebody who doesn't have something and you have it, out of love, you don't think twice about it, you know? I mean, I suspect that most of us were raised by mothers and fathers who didn't buy themselves a new winter coat every 15 years or so. But they made sure that as we grew out of ours, that we got one. It might not have been brand new, it might have been a hand-me-down, but they knew we got it. And of course, you know how mothers buy things. The first year it's too big for you. The second year it fits you. The third year it's too small, but you only wait every few years to get a new coat. So if we see this as, I don't want to give it up, then don't. But if you see it as, I never wear that coat, you know? I was driving one day down to New York to visit an older sister who's a great friend of mine, and I was listening to the all news station, and they had on a blurb from Brooklyn, and some priest in Brooklyn said, they were interviewing him, he said, oh yeah, he said, there's just so many homeless. He said, so what we started doing, he said, with the people I work with, we get a blanket, we put in the blanket, thermal socks, because this is New England, so it's cold. Thermal socks, thermal gloves, thermal hats. What's in something else? Oh yeah, a little bit of food, you know, that won't go bad. And then ties up the blanket and everything in it with a bungee cord. Because if you're homeless, you need that bungee cord so you can hang it on your shopping cart or your backpack or the suitcase you're rolling along. So anyway, I came back the next Monday morning and I'm telling the kids about this. I said, you want to do this? I said, there's tons of homeless in our neighborhood. I said, we can drive around and hand them out. And sure, so all of a sudden, I mean, unbelievable response, you know, and most people brought brand new things, but a couple people said to him, I've never worn it, etc. And then they started putting in coats, they started putting in, and the kids would get them all, wrap them all up in bungee cords, and we drive around and give them to the homeless. And that's the kind of joy and love with which we take that extra coat out of our closet. So it's not just the giving of the coat, it's the knowing the person who needs it more than, and like I said, we've done it all our lives. We were brought up in families where our parents always had enough to share. You know, one of our sisters was in Africa, and she said she had asked the African sisters, what gift do I bring? She was visiting from Canada, and they said rice. You know, bring a package of rice, you know, so they went to the market, they got a sack of rice, and they brought it to this poor woman in a round hut. And so she invited them in to sit down. She said, just excuse me 1 minute, I'll be right back. She slips out, she comes back in. She had taken the rice immediately and taken half of it to her neighbor next door. You know, it's unbelievable. And there's another great story about rice. And it was, believe it or not, it was a Sister Bridget. And when you hear the story, you're going to say, it was Sister Bridget. Okay. So Sister Bridget there was a special kind of rice that only grew around Christmas time. And it was more expensive than regular rice. It was a yellow rice. So she had little packages of this rice as gifts at midnight mass. And so at midnight mass, they gave out these little packages of rice to everybody, and very poor people, it was a big treat. So about 6 weeks later, she's putting, and before they left midnight mass, the rains came, so people were standing in the back waiting for it to let up. You know, it was just a quick storm. And she noticed one crippled man coming back up to the altar and kneeling down in front of the manger. And she thought he was just praying, which he was. And then he went back, and then they all went away. So 6 weeks later, Sister Bridget's putting away the manger scene. And stuck under the crib is his bag of rice. And she knew it was his because she had their names on it. So the bag of rice stuck there. Now here's a guy who needed it more than anyone, and he turned around and he gave it to the Christ child. Now, someone else would say, well, that was a waste of the rice. I don't think so. It was that important to him, that important. I don't know anything that prepares us for those kinds of actions and hearts more than Eucharist. We begin to absorb what Jesus has done for us. Everything else is his, and we just give it. In the heart's beat. You know, why do you stand for the children? In the heart's beat, all right? So we stand for the dignity and rights of workers, starting with our own institutions. I was so proud of our school this year. Before the government made provisions, our principal, you know, when school was closed, the teachers, of course, still had their jobs because they were online, but all the aides lost their jobs. So before he knew he was getting reimbursed, our principal said to them, nobody loses a job on my watch. You will all be paid. And I was so proud of him, you know. Now, in the end, we got the money back, but he didn't know that when he did it, right? And of course, our American racism. There are no racial or ethnic boundaries. The part 3, who stands with us? Our identity. We are standing. Who are we in Eucharist? And Dan Berrigan's answer is the risen bread. We know Eucharist is the bread of life, but the risen bread, all right? All of those images of the yeast in the bread and Jesus dying and rising. And of course, we were raised on this, weren't we? All the joys and hopes and griefs and anxieties of this people of this age are the joys and hopes and griefs and anxieties of the people of God, which is exactly what we're seeing in Mark's gospel. All the joys and hopes and griefs and anxieties of the people of Israel and of the surrounding areas became Jesus's joys and hopes and griefs and anxieties. Jesus enjoyed his encounters with people, except the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You know, he really liked that woman that wouldn't get away unless he gave her the dregs of his table. And he liked that Samaritan who stood at the well and argued with him. You know, he really engaged with people. And if he did it, then we're called to do that. All creation, our expanse has been broadened. It's a sacred treasure. The global family, certainly for better or for worse, is how we live today. Victims of violence are part of us. And as people of the risen bread, we are people of the gospel of life. Go back to the poem. I want to just leave it up there for a minute. There we go. Why do you stand, they were asked, and why do you walk? Because of the children, they said, and because of the heart, and because of the bread. Because the cause is the heart's beat, and the children born, and the risen bread. So, can we get our YouTube?
In an upstairs room, a parable is just about to come alive. And while they bicker about who's best, with a painful glance, he'll silently rise. Their Savior's servant must show them how, by the will of the water and the tenderness of the towel. And the call is to community, the impoverished power that sets the soul free, in humility to take the vow that day after day we must take up the basin and the towel. By the will of the water and the tenderness of the towel. And the space between ourselves sometimes is more than the distance between the stars. By the fragile bridge of the servant's bow, we take up the basin and the towel. Power that sets the soul free, in humility to take the vow that day after day we must take up the basin, and day after day we must